hearty message of solidarity as we collectively mourn the passing of our nation's last remaining vestiges of democracy. Last week's abortion of our rights and liberties at the hands of the almighty Scottish Six bore a bevy of rapaciously grotesque rulings that introduced the theocratic states of America. Let me make sure that we have audio working. Here, we'll be right back. Let's try that again. My friends, allow me to begin this special Friday edition of Coup Save America with a hearty message of solidarity as we collectively mourn the passing of our nation's last remaining vestiges of democracy. Last week's abortion of our rights and liberties at the hands of the almighty Scottish Six bore a bevy of rapaciously grotesque decisions that have ushered in the dawning of our new theocratic states of America. Now, one can only imagine the gruesome sight of those black robed justices standing over the crime scene as they water freedom from the blood soaked parchments of our Constitution. These rulings last week were not only a fatal blow to the future of our republic, but to our planet as well. The most upsetting of the court's decision, of course, is the 5-4 ruling overturning Roe v. Wade, the 1973 landmark ruling protecting a woman's right to choose an abortion, upending nearly 50 years of federal protections for women's rights. Now, immediately following the official release of the court's decision, abortion became illegal in at least 13 states, where trigger laws had gone into effect. It's anticipated that there will be a total of 23 states that will soon either ban or severely restrict access to abortion, with many states proposing the imposition of draconian criminal sentences against both patients and medical professionals. Now, oddly, these justices may have opened themselves up to criminal prosecution themselves. You see, they gutted the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to curb the release of carbon emissions by the nation's power plants. Now, interestingly enough, carbon emissions has been scientifically linked to the increased risk of miscarriage in the first trimester. So, perhaps with all of these new laws criminalizing abortion, just maybe these justices will be trading in their lifetime appointments to the High Court for a lifetime sentence in a prison cell. Isn't that something? Now, this does bring about some important issues. This is obviously an outright assault on women's rights. And it's not surprisingly, it has ignited both a wave of celebratory jest among a fragmented minority on the far right and a contemptuous fury among the majority of Americans who continue to stand in support of a woman's right to choose. Now, as is our natural human impulse, Americans have already been quick to assign the finger of blame for this nightmarish transition to a real-life Handmaid's Tale toward their presumed political rivals, with obviously Republicans taking most of the heat. Some have even taken to blaming Bernie Sanders and his supporters, such as the iconic scapegoats such as Susan Sarandon, Breonna Joy Gray, Katie Halper, Crystal Ball, just to name a few. Here's the thing, though. Very few are targeting their fury at the Democratic Party itself, which, to be clear, has played long games where they've basically been playing fast and loose with abortion rights, using the emotionally charged issue as a cudgel to fill their campaign coffers and motivate their frightened base to the voting booths. It's easy to forget that it was former Barack Obama who had failed to deliver upon his promise to codify Roe v. Wade, making that his top priority once elected. Well, as it turns out, that didn't make his list of priorities at all. It would also have been an easy promise to fulfill, given that he enjoyed a supermajority in Congress during his first term. Likewise, President Obama could have fought harder to appoint Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. Now, in case you're thinking, well, he did everything he could, let me suggest a thought experiment. Just consider for a moment what Donald Trump would do in the same position if Democrats were in the majority and attempted to deny him his Supreme Court justice nomination. Food for thought. So, there's also the question of the Democratic Party itself. And the fact is that Democrats have been actively recruiting, endorsing, and supporting pro-life Democrats into the party. Even now, today, in the aftermath of the leaked Supreme Court ruling, and let's go even back further, back to 2017, when Nancy Pelosi actually suggested that the Democrats' focus on abortion access was in fact hurting the party. Now, even now, in the aftermath of that leaked opinion, which foreshadowed the overturning of Roe v. Wade, Nancy Pelosi, James Clyburn, and other party leaders, what have they done? They've thrown their full support behind an anti-choice and anti-gun control Democrat, Henry Cuellar, over a progressive challenger. Seems to show where their priorities lay. Let us also not forget that it was Hillary Clinton who selected an anti-choice running mate in her presidential bid. And she also suggested, according to Politico, that she would be amenable to compromising her position on abortion rights if proposed laws included exceptions for rape and incest. So, it seems to me that it's quite evident that neither the Democratic Party or the Republicans are unduly concerned with protecting a woman's right to bodily autonomy, other than, of course, using this issue for their political gains. So, what can we expect in the future? And just what are the consequences for women's health in our post-Roe v. Wade America? Well, to answer this question, we don't really need to even look back 50 years. We can simply look to the here and now. Of course, 50 years ago, abortion was illegal. However, we can catch a glimpse of the future in just the last 10 years. Picture this. A panic-stricken woman is being transported in the back of an ambulance. She's in the throes of a physically and emotionally painful miscarriage. And the paramedics know that without immediate medical intervention, the mother's life remains in the balance. Now, medically speaking, there should be a specialist waiting for her arrival in the emergency room, ready to induce labor and safely extract the already self-aborting fetus, prioritizing the mother's life and safety with the least amount of stress on her already fragile condition. Sadly, there would be no swift and medically necessary intervention for this mother upon her arrival at Mercy Health Partners in Muskegon, Michigan. Already devastated by the loss of her baby, this woman's nightmare would endure for another 8 long and agonizing hours. So, why was this patient denied the care and compassion that she so desperately needed and deserved? Well, here's the thing. You see, because Mercy Health Partners is a Catholic hospital, a religious institution that has never been required to abide by the rights granted under Roe v. Wade. You see, religious doctrine was more important than medical science, and of course, the mother's health and well-being. A set of directives established by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops forbid terminating any pregnancy at any stage unless the mother's life is in grave danger, not merely at risk, which is, of course, a diagnosis open to much interpretation. In this sad case, because the fetus's heart was still faintly beating, the doctors at Mercy Hospital were forced to stand aside and watch as their patients not only suffered, but as the patient's temperature steadily climbed, unable to act on her behalf until she showed signs of sepsis, an advanced infection that would unquestionably kill the woman if left untreated. The doctors were finally allowed to induce labor and ease the patient's suffering, at least the immediate suffering. As was expected, the premature infant lived for only while being forced to naturally deliver a fetus that was known to be non-viable. The woman in the story is one of 5 women between 2009 and 2010 who had to endure lengthy miscarriages of non-viable fetuses thanks to Mercy Medical Partners' strict ban on abortions. And this is just one of the many hospitals that must abide by the bishop's rules for health care. Now, it may sound like I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but it's nonetheless an important tangent to emphasize that the religiously influenced healthcare doctrines that we now fear in the wake of the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade have already, unbeknownst to many, taken root in medical facilities across our nation, putting people's lives in severe jeopardy. As I mentioned earlier, all Catholic healthcare facilities, and other religious healthcare facilities, by the way, including hospitals and clinics and many affiliated providers, are governed by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops' ethical and religious directives. This is a numbered set of rules that apply Catholic doctrine to healthcare. The rules include forbidding services way beyond just abortion, such as contraception, tubal ligation, and, of course, physician-assisted suicide. Vasectomies are also banned at many of these hospitals. Catholic control of hospitals has been steadily increasing in the United States, and until now, 1 in 6 hospital beds are actually in Catholic facilities. And this is a number that does not even include secular hospitals that are similarly bound to the Church's doctrines throughout joint operating agreements. I know about this from of course, being in Washington State, which is where nearly 41% of all hospitals are either owned by or affiliated with the Catholic Church, in many cases leaving entire regions without a secular hospital option. Mergers and takeovers of secular hospitals are increasing across the country, especially after the COVID pandemic. This is, of course, triggering new alarms about the intrusive religious restrictions on patients' access to health care. Now, it seems a little strange, this next one here, because there seems to be a bit of a contradiction in the Church's own doctrines, where they state life begins at conception. But see, this devotion to the life of the fetus, it doesn't seem to apply when Catholic-affiliated hospitals are, you see, guilty of malpractice. In response to a recent lawsuit, a Catholic hospital in the state of Colorado has actually argued that it is not liable for the death of 2 7-month-old fetuses because, figure this, they claim fetuses are not people. The lawsuit, filed by Jeremy Stodgill, whose 31-year-old wife Lori died in 2006 at St. Thomas More Hospital, accuses the medical facility of wrongful death of the couple's 7-month-old twins after the staff refused to perform an emergency cesarean to save the fetuses. Again, the hospital argued that, under Colorado law, a fetus is not a person, and the plaintiff's claim for wrongful death must therefore be dismissed. Okay, it seems that for at least Catholics, the sacredness of personhood of the unborn seems to end at financial liability. But the Catholic overtaken in medical facilities and their hypocrisy aside, our new worry is that the overturning of Roe v. Wade will take even non-affiliated hospitals in the same direction as their religious counterparts. We are faced with a new era of fear, not just for patients, but for medical staff as well, as legal matters clash with issues related to quality of care. And while there will likely be exceptions made for emergency situations in states where abortion is banned or heavily restricted, the burden of proof will still be on the doctors and the hospitals to make a case that an emergency abortion is absolutely necessary. And this legal hurdle might cause even the most sympathetic and concerned doctors to think twice and not act quickly enough when it comes to treating a woman in distress. These are some of the unintended consequences that we can expect. Another issue is the fear of prosecution that patients will now experience even just when seeking care. The National Advocates for Pregnant Women, NAPW, report that 1,667 women have been arrested or deprived of liberty for harming their fetuses between 1973 and 2020, with well over half of said incidences occurring in the last 15 years as abortion rights have become more and more politicized throughout the nation. Women who rush to emergency rooms who are already miscarrying are already, in a number of cases, being subjected to scrutiny about the possible cause of their condition, if there is even any suspicion that they might have done something intentional to bring on a miscarriage. These are frightening times. In 2020, for instance, a 21-year-old Oklahoma woman was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to prison for drug use during her pregnancy, which prosecutors argue that, albeit unintentionally, led to her miscarriage. Doctors would argue that drug addiction is itself a medical condition that requires treatment. But with new, stricter abortion laws on the horizon in many states, our country will be looking at more and more situations where medical personnel would feel obligated, if not literally obligated under the law, to report patient misconduct that could result in a miscarriage/abortion or risk being legally liable themselves. This atmosphere of prosecution will in turn cause patients to be more fearful about seeking medical care when they know they could be subjected to uncomfortable interrogations before they receive help. Women, particularly those of color, and members of marginalized communities who are statistically more likely to be arrested might be increasingly inclined to withhold important information from medical professionals, or just delay seeking care altogether for pregnancy related illnesses, or even refuse to visit the ER at all when a problem arises. You have to remember, women do not always know that they're actually pregnant. The upcoming rise in anti abortion laws is also guaranteed to damage the trust, critical trust, between doctors and their patients. And that is an absolute travesty. That, my friends, is the last word up front. I'm Sean Sainhart, and you are watching Coup Save America on this Friday. Stay tuned. We've got a great show ahead as we're going to continue this conversation about abortion rights and what a post-Roe v. Wade might look like. We have an extremely special guest today, a guest that we've been trying to get for some time, Kelsey Walker. She's the founder and CEO of From the Green Desk, an author of the book Face Everything and Rise. A little bit later in the program, we're going to be joined by our producer, Mackenzie Fritsch, and her mother, who will be sharing her personal abortion story. And in case you've noticed, I might be speaking a little bit differently. And of course, I've got a fat lip. I just had surgery yesterday to receive a potentially cancerous spot on my lip. So, as you can see, I've got a fat lip and a bit of stitches. So, please bear with me. This is going to be a bit of a challenge today. We'll be right back. Okay, normally this would be where we did news that didn't make the news, but frankly, I've had enough of the news. So we're going to get right to our guest, Kelsey Walker. Um, Kelsey,
Hi there.
hi, thank you so much for joining us today. I understand that you were in Washington, D.C.
I was for about 3 days. A fellow angel mama sponsored my trip up there because while she isn't quite in her space to or in her strength to be able to share her story, she believed that I could share both of our stories up in front of the Supreme Court, which I did 3 times. Um, so it was quite a powerful moment to be able to share my personal story with the masses and be able to hopefully encourage and inspire others to keep fighting this
What was the
overturnment.
atmosphere like? Was there? I imagine that there was a lot of protesters. Was there a lot of anti-choice protesters there as well?
There was very few anti-choice protesters when I got there. So I got there Saturday morning, um, and there were few anti-choice. There were thousands of pro-choice um, protesters there. And while it was overall peaceful, you could tell that there was a intense static to the atmosphere. People were angry, people were upset, people were screaming and chanting and crying, and all of the things that go with the onslaught of emotion when your rights are stripped from you.
Yeah, and first off, I want to thank you for doing what you do and going to Washington D.C. and especially speaking for those that can't speak for themselves. Um, and it's really hard. It's very angering. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. There's this. I don't want to be a downer here, but there is a sense of doom.
Yeah.
Um, and it's very frustrating for me to see that the Democrats just don't seem to be fighting. There's things that they could do right now. They could be opening up federal lands to abortion clinics to bypass some of these state laws. They're not doing that. Their solution just seems to be, oh, just vote harder.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's
Go ahead.
infuriating. They're doing nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
And this
you know,
idea that, oh, well, they're doing everything they can, but no, they're not. And I just, unless they're willing to reform the court, I, I don't really see what else is going to work here. Because even if they were to codify Roe v. Wade, as they claim that they will if they get a majority, I don't trust that this court is going to allow that to stand either.
no, honestly, if their intention was for us to be safe and to not be playing with people's lives like they are right now, they would be rushing to push things to help take care of us in the states. The state that I'm in Missouri, I think it was all of 6 minutes before they let their trigger ban go into effect.
Explain the trigger ban and what
So,
that means.
so the trigger ban was voted into effect in 2019 in Missouri, when most people weren't paying attention because Roe v. Wade was still around. So the thought was that it would be a far off thing that we could worry about later. Um, Flash forward 3 years, and it's not so far away. We're here, and minutes after Roe v. Wade fell, the ban went into effect that if you help a Missouri woman or person with a uterus have an abortion, the doctor is liable. If you try to transport a woman out of state, you're liable for criminal prosecution. Um, they also have banned all abortion across the state of Missouri, um, even in cases of rape, incest, and danger to the mother.
And here's what we've heard some people say, well, when these trigger laws were enacted, I mean, there was no intent to prosecute anybody. And so we hear a lot of Republicans now saying, well, that's not really going to happen. We're going to roll those back and we'll reassess. Really, what is the likelihood of that happening? I think this was intentional, and I don't think they're going to rethink this.
I mean, it's happening in Texas right now, where you have a woman who went to the emergency room with the cover story of having a miscarriage. She had taken an abortion pill that she had gotten by mail or procured somehow and was having complications from it. And when she told her nurse, the nurse reported her to the police and she was arrested.
And a lot of these states, I hear, have laws that require hospital staff to actually report their patients to law enforcement.
It is. There are several states that have that, but at the same time, they can be sued for breaking HIPAA, that protects doctor-patient privilege, and that's how the woman was able to leave custody, was because it was violating her right to privacy under the HIPAA laws.
Yeah, and see, this is where people, I think, even that are anti abortion, don't seem to understand that there are consequences that go far beyond just abortion itself that's going to put people's lives at risk. This is not going to save lives whatsoever. And as I said in
No.
the monologue, there's a lot of times where a patient will present in the emergency room with a condition and not even know that they're pregnant. And yet,
Yeah.
that, despite not knowing, they can still be held criminally liable. And same with the hospitals. And we've already seen doctors speak out saying that their concern is, what qualifies as an emergency, because it's
Yeah.
open to interpretation. So you're literally having doctors that are going to be putting themselves at liability with legally or criminally in cases. And so this is going to cause them to really focus less on the medical necessity in front of them.
Yeah. And when you look at, right now, Kansas, which is the neighboring state to Missouri, um, is looking to amend their constitution to ban all abortions in Kansas, um, unless the mother's life is at an emergency risk, like you were describing before. Um, but if it's just at a minimal risk, then it is illegal. So, in cases like mine that we'll get to in a little while, under the ban that they are putting in place, I my the abortion that I would have had would have been illegal, and it would have risked my life. It would have risked having my son grow up without his mom and my husband without his wife, and
Yeah,
that's the
and it
reality.
almost seems that there's a bit of indifference on these lawmakers in these cases, especially like when it comes to. I mean, we've already seen in Catholic hospitals this exact scenario play out, where, I mean, I read one story where a woman's fetus was literally decomposing inside of her before that they would act.
Yep.
And let's not even uh, forget about the emergent, the immediate physical harm. This is an emotional trauma that's going to last an entire lifetime,
Yes.
and it's just utterly cruel and inhumane.
Yeah. And that's the piece that I feel is missing in a lot of lawmakers' discussions is the humanity of what they're inflicting on people across the country.
And a lot of these laws too, defining helping somebody access an abortion. Um, just today, a report came out that Facebook is now censoring posts about abortion pills, how to get mail abortion pills to people. They're censoring that. So, a simple conversation between just two people could be construed as me helping you to get in. I mean, it, there seems to be no limit to the absurdity that we're seeing in this country with this. There's
Yeah.
talk about states like Missouri going after some. If you go to another state, not only can they go after you, but they can also sue the provider in that other state where abortion is legal. So
Yep.
where they could do set up uterus checkpoints at the borders of these states.
There's some states that are talking about um, having like mandating checkpoints at borders where a pregnant person has to take a pregnancy test before they leave, and they have to take one when they come back. And if they come back and they're not pregnant, then they're not allowed to come back. There are seriously some legislatures, I can't recall the state off the top of my head, but that are considering it.
Now, the good news is that we have seen in some of these states where abortion is legal, we've seen some prosecutors come out and say, we're not prosecuting this. We've seen some attorneys general kind of indicate that they're going to ignore the law as well. But of course, this is not a solution. I mean, you can't just roll the dice with, well, maybe I'll get a prosecutor that's not going to um,
Yeah.
act on this. So I think a lot of people are going to say, well, you know, for them, it's very personal for you with your story, and it's not I had a debate on another podcast with somebody who, ironically, was mentioning, oh, women are just popping out babies, and that's what this is all about. They just want to pop out baby, which I thought was odd because his whole argument was, well, they're popping out babies, and tax funds are going to abortion. I'm like, well, no, your argument would actually seem to contradict that because the taxpayers would be paying for the babies being popped out, not being aborted. But this is this attitude that people have that, oh, it's just, women should just stop having sex, as if men have no responsibility in this whatsoever. And to me, it's really about punishing a woman.
Yeah. Men
But
could have 365 kids that they father in a single year, and a woman can mother exactly one in a single year.
yeah, it's just pure hypocrisy and pure insanity. But again, it's very personal for you, and I'd like if you would mind sharing your story because I think it's very important to hear these stories from people across the spectrum.
Absolutely. Um, so my story occurred in 2017. Um, at 17 weeks pregnant, we found out that the baby that I was carrying had osteogenesis imperfecta type 2, which is the lethal version of brittle bone disease. This meant that every single bone in her body was broken. Her ribs were breaking in on her heart and her lungs, and her skull flexed underneath the pressure of an ultrasound wand. And she was suffering. There was no way around it. She was suffering. And the scary part, in addition to carrying a baby that was struggling like that, was that it was also a threat to my life. If one of her bones would have broken and perforated one of my organs, I would bled out and died. And the doctor, while we were at a Catholic, technically hospital, um, for our specialist appointment, because we were at our initial doctor. They said, there's something really terrible wrong. You need to be prepared for the worst. You're going to the specialist to see what's going on. We went to a 2.5 hour ultrasound appointment before we got into the maternal fetal specialist. And she came in the room crying with the diagnosis. Because usually she can help. Usually there's a way that she can, you know, prolong the life of the baby or the fetus, prolong the life of the mother, if they carry the baby. But there was no discussion of that. Like she said, you risk your life carrying it to term. If it does make it to term and you don't die in the process, if the baby is born, that none of them live past 28 weeks of life, because the breaking of the bones don't allow the lungs to develop. So it will slowly suffocate until it dies. And that's not fair
Yeah.
to them.
Or to the parents either, who
No.
have to watch that suffering.
Yeah. Or to my son, who was 3 at the time, to watch his baby sister go through that, or to watch us try to handle that. It's not fair. So we made the decision that the only other option that we had was to have an abortion at 18 weeks. And the law was not on our side. The law in Kansas, which is where we lived at the time, the cutoff is at 20 weeks. Um, so we had to hurry up and do this. There was no time to sit and decompress about what was happening. It was all of 10 days between the initial ultrasound and going to the appointment. And we had a I had a procedure called a D&E. A lot of people hear about D&Cs or the abortion pill. Mine was a D&E, dilation and evacuation. And what a lot of people don't understand is that it's an all-day affair. You can't eat, you can't drink anything the day before, because it's a surgical procedure. You go in at 7 a.m. The whole day, at least 6 times, it is the law that they have to dissuade you from having an abortion. So 6 times they asked me, do you want to do this? Do you want to keep going? In the deepness of my heart, did I want to keep doing this? No, I wanted a healthy baby. But the fact is, that was not going to be the case, no matter what I did. So every time I met it with a yes, I need to keep going. In addition, even though we had a 2.5 hour ultrasound days before, they made us go through another ultrasound by law to re examine all of the broken bones in her body, which was very hard,
Do they
to say
force
the
you to
least.
also watch and
Um,
listen to the heartbeat as a lot of times they do?
They didn't make me listen to the heartbeat, thankfully, but they didn't make me fully watch, but they had the screen facing me. But they didn't like push my cheek over to watch it or anything, but they were just doing what the law told them they had to do.
which is subject you to torture,
Yeah.
emotional torture, really.
Yeah.
God, I'm so
And it
sorry you had to go through that. This is just infuriating.
yeah, it gets worse. Um so you go through that part. Um they ask you again if you want to keep going, and they do the initial part of the procedure, which is breaking your water and inserting bamboo shoots into your cervix to dilate it. Then you have to wait for 4 hours for your body to go into labor and expand your cervix. We were lucky enough that we had a hotel room uh, nearby that we could stay at, that we could go back to um, and wait. There's a lot of women out there that travel to have these appointments. For us, it was 3 hours. There's a lot of people out there that don't have that luxury of somewhere to wait, so they have to wait in their car for this to happen because they don't have enough space. The clinic is so tiny; they don't have enough space for someone to just sit around for 4 hours. So 4 hours goes, contractions happen, things move along, and when we came back, unfortunately, there was a medical emergency, and so I had to wait another hour um, in labor. And the hardest, the hardest part was because it's in a clinic and not in a hospital. They don't anesthetize you all the way. They don't put you out. They give you something called midazolam, which is supposed to help you, make you forget the procedure, like give you amnesia. And it's also supposed to like every single time I had a sleep, that I had to sleep because my body was
Yeah, this is. Jeez, I'm so sorry that you've had to go through this. Like I said, it's torture. It's inhumane. It's treating you less than human. And
Yeah.
to what end, right? Uh, so let's just imagine that, and you mentioned this earlier, let's just imagine that this was happening to you today in a post Roe v. Wade. Um, you would basically be forced to put your life at risk
Yep.
for a non viable child. And this is, again, I want people to understand this is a child that you wanted.
Yeah. We tried for her for 6 months, and we were so happy when we found out we were pregnant. We had told our son that we were pregnant because 13 weeks is supposed to be that magical time when you're past the miscarriage danger window and all of these things. And we had told him he was going to be a big brother, and then we had to tell him that she had to go be in heaven and be in the clouds. And it broke my little kid's heart. And there's while going through these experiences myself was hard. Having to break the heart of your own child is so much worse.
Yeah, and I just, it's just so infuriating, this whole, and fortunately, you're still here, right?
Yeah.
But to subject you, asking once if you want to continue, right? One time, that, okay. But this constant, do they think you forgot? Do they think you don't know where you are? I mean, it's the point of this to me is to be cruel, and again, it's punishing, and this is a child again that you wanted, and they're just the injustice of this whole thing is just beyond the pale to me, and it
Yeah.
angers me that our politicians on either side have done nothing. This is we've known that this is coming. We've known the assault on abortion rights. We know that this is what I mean. This is the whole point of under Trump, right? Getting these
Mm-hmm.
justices. We knew this was what it was about, and now here we are in a post Roe v. Wade, and what I posted on Facebook. I was very angry because I got a email from Nancy Pelosi saying, "Oh, hey, abortion rights have been lost. Please, can you donate 5 or 20?" And I went on Facebook and instead of donating to these politicians who do not need your money in the first place, please find a charity or a group that is helping women to access abortion services. Because as you said, there's travel cost,
Yeah.
there's hotel cost, there's a lot of costs involved. Do you happen to
For
know?
us,
Oh, go ahead.
for us, the abortion cost $2,400, and insurance wouldn't touch it. Insurance actually withdrew touching um, the tr- the ultrasound and the amniocentesis we got because we had the abortion. Um, and we were incredibly lucky because I've worked for nonprofits my entire career, and my husband worked for the school district at the time. So there was not money to go around to have $2,400 laying around to have this done. So the Kansas Abortion Fund and my mother and father pulled their money together to help me receive this abortion. And without them, I would have been stuck because we had 2 weeks, 2 weeks to the cutoff time in Kansas. There was no way that I could save $2,400 to have that done in time. So Kansas Abortion Fund and my mother and father saved my life with financially.
Now, you wrote a book, and you're also
Yes.
the founder of a nonprofit. Share with us the experience of writing a book. I mean, I imagine that was somewhat therapeutic for you, but you are someone who desperately does not want other people to have to go through the same experience. What was the motivation to write the book, and what was that process like for you?
Yeah, so I started writing my book last June when Texas started coming out with all of their heartbeat bill stuff, and Mississippi was struggling, and Kansas all of a sudden came up with this god awful amendment, and I was infuriated because there's this slut shaming rhetoric that goes around that surrounds abortion. There's you know, these women are going out and partying and getting pregnant and having abortions and blah blah blah, and just this tale that these white males are telling in in our in our Congress. And I was infuriated, and the book started pouring out of me in 10 and 15-page spurts. I'd have a flashback, I'd write it down. I would um, have a memory, I'd write it down. And then um, Labor Day weekend, my husband gave me a little grace with the kids, took the kids, let them hang out upstairs while I took what was really just like random writings of um, you know memories and things like that, and put them in order and found the connective tissue between them. And I said, oh my goodness, there's like 200 pages here. And it was handwritten because it was therapeutic to scrape my pencil across the paper. And I sent it to a couple of literary agents, sent it to Amazon, and Amazon said, yes, we want to publish your book. And I said, okay, well, it's not done yet. And they said, we don't care. We're going to help you finish it. And what helped me finish it and what really healed me was in October of 2021, I went to the Women's March in Kansas City, and I took a sign for um, Hope, who's my daughter that we lost, and I, that said, my baby was suffering and dying, and I would have died. Read the truth. And I had my little website on there, just directing them to my blog that I had started. Maybe someone would read my story and feel connected. And what I found when I went was people reached out to me and physically embraced me, pandemic be damned, um, and asked me about my story and let me tell it, just, and every time I told it, it felt like weight came off of me. And I attribute both EMDR therapy as well as those people that had the strength to receive me and give me love that were just complete strangers and allow me to share my story with my healing. And what's more is so many of them said, yes, this has happened to me as well in some fashion. I've had to have an abortion, I've lost a child, I've miscarried, and I've never been able to talk about it. And so from the Green Desk went from being a blog to a nonprofit that I registered, and we do coaching and group therapy and narrative meditation with people who have had abortions, lost children, miscarried, or lost infants, so that they no longer have to endure the silent scream that goes with these losses.
You know, it, it's funny because one of the arguments that you hear from some of these lawmakers is that, well, we're also helping a woman because just having an abortion is such a traumatic ordeal, and they attribute it to this long term, psychological trauma. The interesting part of that is scientific studies show that in a regular situation, that's you're able to recover much more quickly from that trauma than what you have to go through, like your experience. So
Yeah.
if it's like all of these talking points fall apart, and this is why we need more, more people telling their stories. And you're right, when it comes to abortion, it's a touchy subject for people, and there's a lot of shaming. It's automatically assumed, and again, so what? It takes a male and a female for a pregnancy to occur. You don't see slut shaming for men, um, and a lot. There's a Republican who actually just went into his pro-life, staunchly anti-abortion. Turns out he got his mistress pregnant and ordered her to have an abortion, and this just came out, and of course now he's gone into hiding. It's like, and the powerful and the rich don't seem to care because they're always going to have access to abortion. It's the people who are impoverished, people of color, the average citizen who's stuck, that's losing their rights. And that's what's most infuriating to me is just the utter hypocrisy, the false talking points, the shaming, and the refusal of people to listen. Right? We're not having a dialogue; it's a shouting match. And that's why it's so important for you to go to Washington D.C. and to speak in front of the Supreme Court and share these stories. Unfortunately, the people that you're sharing the stories with are already rational and understanding of this issue. It's so how do you think we can break through this divide and reach across the aisle and like, look, again, it's not just about abortion. There's a lot of other issues at play here.
I think telling the story, like being vulnerable enough to tell the story full out and outright, helps. However, there are those, right now I'm in a political ad for Kansans for Constitutional Freedom to protect the right to choice in Kansas. And it encapsulates wanting to save my life, to stay alive for my son and my husband. What it doesn't talk about in the ad is the condition that Hope was in. And so I've had comments surrounding, you seem very smart and very intelligent, but you're too stupid to not get pregnant. And I was like, I didn't comment back. I just reported the harassment on social media. But it's like, no, you're right. I wasn't smart enough. I, in fact, wanted to get pregnant and have a healthy baby. I also have had people say, well, if you were going to die, that was God telling you that it was your time to die. And I'm like, there's so much,
Hate.
it's easy for me to just report the harassment and walk away from it. But there is someone in that hateful person's life that is needing abortion as healthcare, that is suffering in silence because they have so much hate in their heart. And that is sad for the people that they love.
And a lot of people that are subjecting you to this hate, that are having these positions, are very likely, especially with these abortion laws, to be impacted themselves in ways that they can't even imagine. And
Yeah.
that's the sad part of this, is that this is about women's health. It's about women's rights. It's about a woman's right to choose what happens to her body. And yeah, I believe me, I've tried to have some debates on social media about this, and you you just get the standard talking points. Nobody wants to listen. Nobody wants to, and I get, there's when does like we can have these conversations. When does life begin? When you know, um, but my position is kind of if it until it can survive outside the womb, that should be at least the starting point of that discussion. Um, and no one seems to understand that this is a well, I shouldn't say nobody, but the people that I argue with don't seem to understand that this is a woman's right issue. I mean, we're in a country that still has not ratified the Equal Rights Amendment that are essentially granting women equal rights under the law. And
Yeah.
this is just yet another assault. And it's again, this is not about saving lives. No one, and the other interesting point is they claim it's about pro-life, yet they don't want to provide any social safety net for mothers who who have kids. They don't want to provide education. They don't want to fund health care. It's like
How about the formula shortage that's happening right now?
exactly.
Like,
So it's like obviously this is again more about, and I don't want to say it's always the case about punishing women, but for the most part, that's what this does. And I think people need to understand that abortion never used to be the issue that it was today politically. This was a politically um, motivated strategy to basically get more Republicans, basically to get more of the evangelicals onto the Republican side. I mean, the person that devised this strategy has actually come out and apologized for making abortion this politicized issue. So this is not even something that goes back as far as people think. And there's nothing in the Bible that even suggests abortion is forbidden. It's just these political talking points that have come about. Um, and that's what's most disturbing about this is that we're not basing any of this on fact. It's
mhm.
just attack. Um, it, it's just it's so infuriating, and to hear that you've been and again, people just make assumptions. They see that clip in
Yeah.
that ad, and they just make assumptions about you. Um, I probably wouldn't be so kind as to just report them. I'd probably have to respond, but yeah, I'm sorry. And again, that's just more traumatizing for
Yeah.
you. Um,
And I mean, the reason why I don't engage is I don't want to lead them back to my personal feed that has my children on it.
right.
You know, unfortunately, you know, would I love to engage them in conversation? Yeah, but if they're hateful and dumb enough to make those comments, they're hateful and dumb enough to come after me and my family.
Yeah. Um, and this
So,
the scary thing is too. I mean, and again, I don't want to say this about all the people on the pro life side. I know that this is just not a minority, but I mean, we've seen attacks on protesters right now. Right,
mhm.
pro choice protesters being run down by trucks. Um, the
Yeah,
expectation of violence. Uh, Not to mention in the past the bombing of abortion clinics, the assassinations of abortion providers. I mean, this is coming from a crowd that, and again, I understand it's not everyone, but it just seems sort of contradictory that you're pro life, but we're going to kill you. Or
hmm
even some of these laws that are considering imposing the death penalty for women that get an abortion.
well, and a later half or a later part of my story into my book, it talks about what it's like to try to find mental health help after having an abortion, especially in a conservative state. Um, when you leave a clinic after having an abortion, they give you 4 phone numbers for support because, again, everything's very regulated. Those 4 phone numbers are the suicide hotline, the abortion support hotline, a psychiatrist in Overland Park, which I lived 3 hours away from, and telehealth wasn't really a thing in 2017. So might as well have just burned that one. And the last one is the after hours phone number for the clinic because of the procedure that I had and how few people get that procedure. Um, if you go to an emergency room, if I'm showing signs of infection or have abnormal bleeding or abnormal cramping or something going on, if I go to an emergency room, they won't know how to treat me. And those are the 4 phone numbers you get for support after care. There's there's no this is a safe psychologist to go to, or this is a safe church to go to, or this is a safe XYZ to go to, which is another reason why I started from the Green Desk. Um, because about a month or so, or less, I can't remember, after Hope died, I was just searching for help from someone, anyone. Again, working for nonprofits doesn't make a lot of money to be able to afford therapy. And I saw an ad in the newspaper for an abortion support help group. So I called it and they said, "We'll meet you." They let me tell my story. And then they leaned in and told me that they might pray for my baby, but I'm going to go to hell. And that is how they left me. It was a pro life organization that ambushed me. And between that and the 7 churches that I called to have my daughter's ashes blessed or to have some kind of a funeral, that all 7 said no, I was very bitter with God for a very long time, and clergy in general. It drove a big wedge. And it took me another 2 months to find any help. And that was my husband stepping in and saying, "You can't sit here with flashbacks day after day. You have to get back on your feet. You have to keep going." And he found a psychologist that was safe to talk to and would work with us financially. And it all caused painful scarring, and it all made my healing process that much longer.
Have you been able to find a place of worship to go to that's supportive?
I haven't, it wasn't until 2021 that I stepped in a church. And that was for the first time I went to a church for a concert after the um, Women's March. Um, and it was a very liberal church. They're not Christian. They're not really any specific religion. They're like a blend, and they were very welcoming. I still didn't trust churches and didn't go back. And it wasn't until the Mother's Day protests this last year, a pastor from a Universalist, Universalist Unitarian or utilitarian, I can't remember. Like it's like a UU. Um, she reached, I guess one of her followers heard my story and reached out to me and said that they would bless Hope's ashes for me and pray for her. So for Hope's 5th birthday this year, we will finally have her ashes blessed and prayed for.
5 years.
Yep.
It, doesn't seem like a very Christian thing. We might pray for your baby, but you're going to hell. So basically, it would th- their their choice would have been for you and for the baby to both die.
That
That's their
seems like
Christian.
the resounding roar from the other side, is that because I had to make that decision, that um, my soul wasn't worth saving, and they weren't going to be involved with my baby either.
Yeah, there's there's something really wrong with people when they
Yeah.
allow their extremist beliefs to impose this kind of abuse and trauma on people.
Yeah,
Um,
it's some the woman that I talked to, the pastor that's going to bless her ashes, called it. I think she called it spiritual abuse,
yeah, no,
and
that's a good term for it.
that's what we went through.
Yeah, and it's also just sort of detrimental to their I mean, again, it seems very unchristian like to me, but it also seems just detrimental to their own belief system. I mean, do they, are they expecting to bring people into their faith with this kind of, demeanor? It's just this.
I mean, I was in a foxhole, and they always talk about foxhole Christians. I was in that foxhole. If they wanted to pull someone into their faith, that was the time to do it. And instead, they shoveled dirt into my face.
And I wish I could give you a hug. I mean, I'm just. This is just. I can't imagine treating another human being this. I just. Um, uh, would you mind? I'd like to bring my producer in,
Mm-hmm.
because her mother had an abortion, and I'd like to kind of, if you don't mind, if we could do
Yeah,
that,
of course.
because I'd love you guys to talk.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't work so well.
Go ahead and cut me out of the picture
Yeah,
so
I'm
that we can
going to
see you
take
both.
you out. Oh,
Hi.
I'm here with my. Oh, this is the way I've been. Hello, um,
Hello.
I'm producer Mackenzie. I'm here with my mother Carol Ann. And
Hi.
first off, I just want to say that just thank you for being there, being someone for women who are struggling and can't find any support. Um,
Yeah.
and we are going to go to a quick break for just a second so we can relocate the dog. We weren't expecting quite so soon. And we
Okay.
will be back shortly.
Okay.
Hello, we are back. Sorry about that. Um,
All right.
all right. So, just to start off, I'm going to tell my mother's story in brief of the background of what happened or what caused her to make the choice to have an abortion. And then I'll get out of the frame here because I don't actually really fit. And I will let you ask her a few questions, and demonstrate that what your nonprofit would do to help women like her who have questions and have had a lifelong of emotional um, effect from what they went through.
Yeah.
So, yeah, my mother met my father when she was 15 years old at a very conservative Christian boarding school, and they dated, and they began to be sexually active in the appropriate year of 1969, and they did not their religion did not teach any kind of sexual education. Families, parents did not talk about these things. There were all kinds of crazy rumors flying around, like you can't get pregnant the first time you have sex, and um, just no access to birth control. There was just this idea that certain times of month, and just a lot of misinformation, and just a general lack of knowledge. And so my mother was 17 years old when she began being sexually active, and a few months into that, she did discover she was pregnant, and she suspected she was pregnant. A lot of, just basically morning sickness was the clue, and lack of menstruation. When she had the suspicion, her parents were away on vacation, and she was staying at a friend's house. So she made a doctor's appointment and went by herself to a doctor. And the year was 1970. There was still 3 years shy of Roe versus Wade. So abortion was illegal, but the doctor that she spoke to, although it was inconclusive whether or not she was pregnant, he recommended that she get an abortion because of her age. She was a senior in high school, and she was shocked that in her mind, abortions were something that happened in a back alley. This doctor said, there's somebody I can tell you about. There's somebody who I know who can do this in a sterile environment in a doctor's office. So, but really, my mother was just, well, no, I would never do something like that. I'll marry the father, and we'll raise this child. After a talk with the father, my father, he was like, I'm not ready to get married. He was 19. He had already graduated from high school. He was like, I'm not ready to get married. No, an abortion is out of the question, of course. And this was an atmosphere of, what, as you said, spiritual. What was the term used?
Spiritual abuse.
Spiritual abuse, yes. Definitely an atmosphere of spiritual abuse, and like you'll just have to have the baby, and I'll marry you later, or maybe when I'm ready, we'll figure this out.
Nothing was ever mentioned about adoption.
Oh,
of carrying the baby and having adoption. That
well,
was
but
never mentioned. So
that
was either have it or don't.
Yeah,
that's surprising though, because so my mother's biggest concern at the time was really just the social stigma. Her parents had status in the church. She knew that they would be appalled. Now, it wasn't a new situation in their family because her older brother had gotten a girl pregnant just a year before. Fortunately for the family, I guess, she belonged to another church, and as you know, it all, her family suffered all the stigma that comes with a pregnant teenager, but it didn't really affect the father's family. And
of course,
he remained in school. She had to leave she went to a different Christian boarding school. She had to leave her school, and so the procedure at my parents' school was that if a girl were to be with child, she could not attend school, but if she did give the child up for adoption, she could return afterward. I don't
As long
know.
as you didn't tell anybody.
Yeah, as long as you didn't tell anybody, right? As long as you had some excuse for why you'd been gone for a while.
Mhm.
And so when my grandmother returned, and my mother was able to talk to her mother, um, her mother. Oh, I failed to mention that my mother was the good one in the family. That put a lot more pressure. I mean,
Mhm.
not
Smoking good drink, never
Yes.
used drugs.
she never rebelled or experimented, unlike her big brother, who was in constant. Her religion, part of her religion was not eating meat. So her rebellious big brother would sneak off and eat meat whenever he could, and she had never even tasted meat, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So she really did not want to let down her family by, she'd been trying to make up for her brother all her life, and then here she went and did the same thing that he had done. Now, when she was able to tell her mother was surprisingly supportive. I mean, we do have a supportive family, and
My father wasn't good.
yeah, right. And very much to my mother's surprise, when she just offhandedly mentioned that the doctor she'd seen had suggested an abortion, um, her mother was actually, instead of like, oh no, you could never, she said, the doctor has a point. And
Mhm.
then she went on to explain why having a baby at age 17 was not a wise decision. And having to leave school, my mother was already accepted into college and had a plan for her future. Um, and then there were some possibly intentionally, maybe unintentionally shaming type things like, well, you wanted a big white wedding. If you keep the baby and you marry your boyfriend, it's going to be a small private affair,
Yep.
things like that. And really, my mother was still in compliance, although, I mean, she was relieved, after she found out that the father was not going to marry her and help her raise a child. She was terrified at the idea of having to be a single mother, and so. But at the same time, when my mother made the decision to have the abortion, um, she was still doing it mostly because that seemed to be what her mother wanted. Even
Mhm.
though, in later conversations, my grandmother has said that she was not worried about the social stigma as much as my mother feared that she would be. It would they both would have suffered, and my mother didn't want her mother to have to suffer the disdain of the church. That
Mhm.
and with the abortion, it could all be kept quiet. Her father wouldn't need to know, and um, it was just the best decision for, she felt, for a girl her age and in the environment that she was in. But it was also a very difficult decision to make in that environment because it would have to be a secret.
Mhm.
There's the only thing worse than having a baby out of wedlock would be, aborting the baby.
Yeah.
And so, with the support of her mother, my mom was able to go to a real doctor and and get a medically safe abortion. However, the doctor was very abusive toward her and very shaming. And I'll turn this over to my mom and let her finish her own story.
Yeah.
Okay.
As she said, um, it was a very shaming position I was in. like I said, I had been a good girl. I hadn't done anything outwardly bad. Sex, my mom couldn't get me to accept the fact that sex was awful. I found it very pleasant, very enjoyable. And I only had it with one person. And,
Yeah.
and it was just, yeah, it was natural. I do know that once I learned he wasn't receptive to marriage at that point in time, I, I mean, it was a little bit difficult, then, well, he's not willing to, he said, well, you can have the baby and I'll marry you later. And then the idea is, okay, would he marry me later? Would he still be with me later? Would he marry me later because he wanted to, or would he marry me later because there was a baby involved? And would it be me he was marrying, or would he be wanting the baby? So it seemed the optimal choice. Also, in my 17-year-old mind, who had always been controlled by my parents and told what to do and what not to do to be this perfect child, unlike my unperfect brother, I didn't even think of it as a baby, really. It was just something that was growing in me that was going to cause a problem, and I
Yeah.
didn't need it in there. So, with my mom's acceptance of the idea, I mean, she basically brought it up, and to me, if my Christian mother said, yeah, getting an abortion is a good idea, then maybe it was okay. It wasn't
Yeah.
so awful. So I went ahead and went through with it. My um, now husband, then boyfriend. And by the way, I have to admit, we've been together 50 years, so it
Oh,
ended our
congratulations.
relationship. But he um, took me to the doctor. He paid for the abortion. I went into the clinic. A young girl who hadn't even had pap smears or anything, just the one time the doctor could not determine pregnancy. So he had to try to feel, because all the P tests came out negative. And even when I went to the abortion, they couldn't prove it, that I was actually pregnant. Although after the abortion, the doctor said, well, you were definitely pregnant. But
Yeah.
they set you in there in that room and leave you trying to dilate you in this
Yeah.
uncomfortable, awful room. And it hurt so bad. The pain of the cramps was so bad. I was crying. And the doctor came in and to my room, and he took his arm, which his hands were sterile. So he took like his arm and he smashed it against my face and said, shut up. You're scaring everybody out in the other room. You were thought you were old enough to get pregnant. You can be old enough to take this pain. So it was not a pleasant experience.
No.
It fortunately it was over with fast. But then you have to walk out through the waiting room of all these girls who've been listening to you crying and upset and, whatever. I bounced back pretty easy. I went home, walked in the house, and my mom was waiting. And I said, well, there's no more baby. And I guess later she told me that kind of broke her, because it was the first time I'd ever mentioned it was a baby. And I was a big baby lover as a teenager. So it was, difficult. But from then on, though, it was this secret. My brother didn't know. My father didn't know. Family didn't know. His family didn't know. I did have one close best friend who knew, and she was very accepting of the fact, very supportive in my whole life, and was there in the hospital with me when I had my daughter 2 years later. No, wait a minute, 3-4 years later. Anyway.
Yep. Just breathe.
Yeah.
Just breathe.
So, but it still was this big secret thing. And the biggest thing it did to me emotionally is that it stilted my emotional growth. So I have spent my whole life feeling 17. I couldn't get over that trauma in my life that I experienced as a 17-year-old. I don't know what trauma I would have had having had the baby, but there was a whole stigma to this. You can't tell anybody. You can't, nobody can know about this. This is a secret. And I went away, went to college, and had a lot of friends, a lot of people, but I couldn't tell anybody what had happened. I eventually, like I said, at age 19, a couple of years later, I married my husband, and a couple of years after that, we had our daughter, and she's been the most wonderful and perfect thing in my life. Every once in a while, I would have a flashback to the fact I always considered this aborted child to be a boy. I don't know why. I just did. Maybe that's because I wanted a girl. So in my mind, I had to have gotten rid of the boy versus a girl. But I remember working at one time with a young man who would have been, because of his birth date, when he was born and all, he would have been the exact same age as that aborted baby. And I remember feeling very close to him, as far as I kind of in the back of my mind thought of him as that son I never had. We worked together on teams, and we were good friends. Nothing out of the ordinary. But I remember telling him at one time about this, that I'd had an abortion, and if I'd had the child, it would have been his age, which seemed to please him, that I felt that little bit of closeness thing.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, like I said, it was just one of those, we don't talk about this, we don't say anything about this. I went through later in life, my husband's, there were a lot of unwed pregnancies in my husband's family through the years. All the babies were kept and raised. I had cousins that got pregnant and kept the babies and raised them and all this. And at one point in life, a very close friend had also had an abortion as a 21-year-old. And she had to tell her children about it. And she said, when she told their children, she told them, Mama wasn't a Christian when this happened, because she had come into the church later. And then she said to me, I don't know how you're going to explain it to your daughter, since you were a Christian. And my immediate thought was, if I tell my daughter, which at the time she was maybe 6 or so, my idea was, if I tell my daughter, it's not going to be that it was because I wasn't a Christian. It would be because I was a kid. I was only 17. I wasn't an adult living on my own yet, like she had been. So, but she made me feel very guilty, even at that point, that I had done this, because I was a Christian and I shouldn't have done something as a Christian. But I had to remind myself that I wasn't really in control of my life. At 17, my mom is still in control of my life. My parents still have a control over my life. So when they're accepting it, or my mother was accepting it, my father never ever talked to me about it, but he did learn that I had had one when Wade versus Roe came out, and they had all those advertising on TV, about the baby in the bottom of the garbage can, all those posters that were up and all this about anti-abortion, the posters and stuff. There was a commercial on TV that my parents were watching TV and saw the commercial, and my mom started crying, and my dad turned to her and said, our daughter had an abortion, didn't she? And my mom admitted I had. And so, but he never said anything to me about it. Later, I was able to talk to my brother about it. I have been able to talk to family later, but the next big thing that hit me, we did some counseling, and I admitted it to my counselor in a counseling group. he was very anti-abortion. And
Mm.
I said, well, you guys are all upset about this, and here I just wasted the baby. and then they, oh, wait a minute. And then they had a new discussion. But I realized then that the secrecy of it was really hurting me. And this was at age 40 or so.
Yeah.
And, but like I said, at that time, I kind of let my close cousins and stuff, some know. But it really hit me when one of my cousins who had an out of wedlock child, I think she married the father like in her 8th month or something, but it was whatever. She talked to me about how I was the little princess, and that our whole lives, when all of us cousins were growing up, I was always the good one. I always did everything right. I was the good one that they were always pointed to as an example. And she says, you were always the princess. And I started thinking about that. And I started thinking about how the fact that other people in my family had gotten pregnant and kept their babies, and here I had not. And maybe I was this little princess who didn't have to go through this. Of course, I was the only one that was doing this at 17. The others were all 18, 19, 20. They were all older ages. So,
Well, that you know of.
yeah, that I know of. There may have been somebody in there that had one that I didn't know. Actually, I think one of my little cousins was younger, probably 17 or so herself. But I just, anyway, so I started having the latest feelings that came out was this complex of being this little princess that didn't have to have anything bad happen in their lives. And I thought, but I have had to have bad because I've had to live with this secret, this guilty secret my whole life. So it's not like everything was perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But it, anyway, I just, within the last few years, I've actually admitted it to other family members of my husband's family. All these girls have got pregnant and had their babies. And I finally came out and I said, this has been a big secret. And it's not, I'm not telling you this saying this is a secret you have to keep. I'm just saying, this is my story, and I would prefer you not to tell it to other people. You not to discuss it with family members. Let me discuss it. But at the same time, I want you to know that even though you had a different experience by going through raising a child on your own, I had an experience too. It was just a different kind of experience. So
yeah.
And
can I help?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Keep telling your story.
I'm to the end. I'm just going to repeat myself now. But,
okay. Can I help you unpack some of that?
Sure.
So, and I'm a coach. I'm not a licensed therapist, but what I've felt and what I've seen, we do group therapy with a licensed therapist, which isn't me. But I do individual coaching with folks that have had abortions and have had miscarriages and things like that. The first thing that I want to tell you is that, I didn't feel set free until I had something called a truth tour. And in November of 2021, we knew that my book was going to come out. And up until that point, only my parents, my husband, and maybe 2 or 3 friends knew that I had an abortion. Everyone else knew that we had had a baby and that we had lost a baby. But that fear of that stigma and that shame kept us in secret for 4 years. And which isn't nearly as long as how long you've had to wait and shoulder this burden on your chest. But what I found was, when the book was coming out and people were going to know how things really went down with Hope, going through and sitting down and telling our story to each of the family members and them receiving it however they were going to receive it, was so important in setting you free. And for you, a lot of those family members may or may not be around still, because you've been holding on to it for so long. What may help set you free is, if you're ready to tell your story to other folks and feel like you're in a safe place, a safe space to tell that story, then tell it to them in person if you can.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't, write it out in a letter to each person that you want to tell. And then you can either hold on to them, you can burn them and set them free. You can, do a number of things with a letter that you write. It doesn't have to go out, but physically scratching the pen or the pencil to the paper and getting the pain and the burden that you're holding in your heart from this secret that you've had to hold on to will feel cathartic, and it'll help get some of that weight off of your chest.
It did feel much better when I was able to tell my sister-in-laws. I had a whole group of them together and was able to tell my story. And, it was very freeing to me. I had to then personally tell. My closest one was not at that meeting, at that gathering. I had to tell her.
Of course.
She raised her own child all on her own. Yeah, and it was a rape baby even. She kept it. She wanted a child anyway. She was happy to have the child, and he's the same age as my daughter, so it was, we were pregnant together with those two. But she's very, very anti-abortion, and every time something comes up about abortion, she is so strong and firm about the fact that there's no reason anyone should ever, ever have an abortion, that telling her was one of the hardest things I ever did. And so I was really, really pleased with how she took it. She didn't shame me or didn't give me all the bad things I thought she would, because she had been so, because every time we would get in little arguments when abortion would come up, and I would give reasons for why. There's no good reason for it. If you can't keep the baby, you have it, you give it away. Of course, I would never have given away mine. Nobody in my family would give away theirs. We all raised them ourselves. And so, but she seemed to be accepting of it. It has not been mentioned since. I gave her the same thing when I said, I've told some of your sisters, there is still one family member, one of my husband's siblings, that I haven't come out and told. And she is a very vengeful person. And so it was hard for me to, and she doesn't live near or close or anything. And we don't have a close relationship. So it's like, if somebody in the family tells her, it's not going to bother me. But if they do, it's going to be one of those knives in the back kind of thing that, but I did not want to put them under the onus of secrecy. When I told them, I said, I am not saying this is a secret, that nothing can ever be said about this. I'm just saying it's my story to tell. I would prefer if you didn't tell anybody else in the family, don't. I didn't care if they related to their kids, my nephews and nieces and stuff. But the whole thing was, why would I want to put another person under the burden of a secret like that? So I didn't want it to be a secret, but I said it is my story, not it's, but if people want to discuss it, that's fine. It's just don't make a big deal about it to somebody that doesn't know yet.
Right. Well, and my other piece to help unpack it or help maybe kind of keep it in a safe space for you is I don't know if you know of the author Glennon Doyle, but she went through a big life change, and she talks about her and her kids and her little family is on an island.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a drawbridge that goes up and there's a drawbridge that can come down. You know, you and your daughter and your husband and whoever you feel especially close to, you're on your island together of love and of acceptance and of this knowing of your story, this level, you know, this other kind of level of inclusivity in your life. You know, you can tell other people and let that drawbridge down and let them see your secret and your pain and your shame and let them respond how they're going to respond, whether that's with love and understanding, whether that's their own bubbling shame and guilt and feelings and all of these things. But be prepared that if you need to bring your drawbridge up, to let them feel their feelings, so that way you are on your island with your people and you are psychologically safe. Be okay with doing that for a little bit. For myself, even though my mother and father were the ones that knew first, and she was, you know, we have some similarities in that my mother, when we spent the day with the maternal fetal specialist, my son was with my mother and father for the day. And when my mother saw me, she said, "You have to go get that abortion because it's not, we can't save your baby's life, but we can save your life. You have to do this to save your life." And my mom was a diehard Catholic for her whole life.
Mm-hmm.
She still is Catholic, but struggles in a lot of ways because her daughter, bent what a lifetime of believing was for her. And so it took her time to work through her own shame and her own guilt. And it was okay for us to put that drawbridge up for a little bit while she worked through her own pieces of that puzzle. But when she was ready to be okay with what, you know, okay as you can be when you have these kind of things happen, right? When she was ready to be part of the love and the acceptance piece, we let the drawbridge back down and let her be part of the story and be part of that pain. So don't be afraid to bring your drawbridge up if you need to protect yourself a little, especially if you've got someone who you know is a vengeful type person. That is a strong feeling. That is a strong way to put it. If you know them to be that way, don't be afraid to put your drawbridge up after you share, because you need to protect yourself and your people on your island.
Thank you for your advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to come back in and say thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah.
Really wonderful. I was glad earlier that you touched on the idea. It was something that I've heard a lot from people who are against abortion, that women use abortion as a form of birth control, and that, you know, as long as abortion is legal, no one's going to take any responsibility, and they're just going to get pregnant and go off and have an abortion. And that's such a ridiculous thought.
Yeah.
And an abortion is, like you said, it is a surgical procedure. It's, you know,
It's not a choice without consequence.
Yes, exactly. Inconvenient is a mild way of putting it, but it's it's not something that someone just says, oh, just shrugs and says, yeah, well, I'm just going to have sex with this guy. I don't want to have a child with him, but I'll get an abortion afterward. It's expensive, for one thing. It's
Yeah.
not covered by insurance. It requires multiple appointments, and it's just not. I don't know. That's just the funniest argument that I hear, but I hear it so much.
It's going to go back to not requiring a lot of appointments. It's going to go back to not being legal. So it's going to go back to
Yeah, and I just wanted to thank you for you guys sharing your story. That was, I can only imagine, you know, what that was like, and it's not fair, and it's incredibly hard, and for someone to live with that for so long is profound.
I wanted to mention too that Mom, you left me out of your story. She did.
I didn't tell her.
Yeah, she told me when I was 18 years old, right after I graduated from high school. She was able to.
I was able to tell her this story because I knew she was starting to become. Well, I didn't necessarily know whether she was sexually active or not, but she was to that age where she had guys and stuff around, and so in a way, it was a determined to, first of all, you be careful. I want you to take care that you don't have to go through something like this, but just I want you to know I'm supportive if something happens. If you end up pregnant, if you end up needing this, then you're going to get supported. So
that's so good.
And you have always been very supportive.
And I'm glad I had a wonderful daughter.
Oh.
I am very staunchly pro-choice. I've never been in a position in my life where I needed to make a choice, and I don't. But I think that if I were ever in that position, looking back on my particular life, there's never a time when I would have gotten an abortion. There are times when I would have kept and raised a child. There are times when I would have adopted out a child. I don't think I would have ever gotten an abortion, but that's my personal choice. Had my life taken a different course, like, for example, if I had gotten pregnant, in school or at a time when it just wasn't the right time for a pregnancy or a baby or any of that, then I would have felt comfortable in my family, in my environment. There might have been a lot of people that I would have had to keep it secret from, though, granted. But I don't know. I would just like that choice to be there for me and for everyone else. And
absolutely.
So I'm going to bring Sean back on now to close off the show. And thank you again.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you. I just can't see you.
Oh. Oh. Hopefully there we go.
There it goes.
I didn't get a chance to read all of your book because it was kind of last minute notice, but there was a line that I think, if you don't mind, can I just read this one line?
Yeah.
And I think this really sums up what you said too. This is my eulogy for my sweet baby Hope. It's my cry as a mother to tell the world that my baby mattered and that what happened to us was unjust. That right there, I think, says so much.
Yeah.
This, from what I've been able to read of the book, it's very well written, by the way.
Thank you.
It's inspirational. It's relatable. And one of the things that I want my audience to do is visit your website. Can you tell us about the 50-state challenge? Because this is something that I think is incredibly important that people can do.
Absolutely. So The 50 States Challenge is a small free funder to help get my book in the hands of every senator, governor, Supreme Court justice, and president. Um, and I'm getting the books printed at cost, so I'm not making money off of it. I'm actually spending money on it. And then also, and I'm mailing those books directly to them. Um, I'm having a mailing book stuffing into envelope party with some like-minded fellows on July 20th, and getting those books out into the hands of those people. And I think that it's important because not to sell books, but to sell, I mean, it's not selling, but to get the impact out there, to rewrite the narrative surrounding abortion and rewrite the narrative surrounding those that need it as healthcare, and how the laws are doing harm and how they're going to continue to get worse in this post-Roe era.
Yeah, and again, please, I think it's $30.
Yep, $30 sponsors a state.
Um, and people, $30, that could change so much. If we can reach out to even just one, right? One person, one senator, one member of the House, whatever, or even a Supreme Court justice, although it's a little late for them now, but hopefully
Yeah,
this will come back,
yeah,
because it is important to change people's perspectives. And I'm telling you, this book, again, this tells a story that needs to be told. And if we're going to shift the political landscape, we have to reach out with emotion, compassion, knowledge, and listening. And even if this book gets in, most likely it will first be read by an aide. Don't underestimate the influence of these congressional aides. Um, and believe me, your phone calls and your letters matter too. So please,
yes,
just call up. It doesn't matter. Just call up and give a voice. It does matter. It does make an impact. And please, join this 50 state challenge, because it is so incredibly important. And again, instead of donating to a politician who doesn't need your money, this is something that you can do that can make a real difference for $30. So
yeah.
please, tell us where we can find the website and where we can get the book, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is fromthegreendesk.com, and make sure you put from in there. If you go to the Green Desk, you're going to go to a workshare in New York, and that's just not it. So it's fromthegreendesk.com. There you can find a link to the book. You can find a link to the 50 States Challenge. You can also get links directly to my Calendly to get services for free, for coaching and group therapy and narrative meditation as well.
Yeah, and I find you to be a very inspirational person.
Thank
And
you.
thank you so much for the work that you do and for sharing your story. And hopefully you'll come back and let us know how this 50 state challenge is going, and keep us kind of abreast as to how this is all working out with, in these states, especially as these laws take
Yeah,
effect. So I'd love to have you
absolutely.
back.
Yeah.
Again, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I hope people have learned. And again, please go to the website, join the 50 state challenge. It is incredibly important. We'll be back next Tuesday. That's Coup Save America. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.